Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the In Pursuit podcast. My name's Dion Garrett, and this is a podcast that's all about pursuing a whole life, trying to find greater measures of whole life. That's kind of what I'm doing, and that's what my guest here today is doing. I'd love to introduce you to the one and the only Jocelyn Garrett, who also happens to be married to me. Beyond that, though, Jocelyn is a undergrad. Your education was psychology, sociology. Is that right?
Yep, double major.
And then you have a master's in
HR something, HR development or something.
Yeah, the development side is how I remember it of people development. She's also a yoga teacher and does all kinds of other stuff. But I don't know where I rank in the list of your biography. Like, how many lines down is being married to me in your biographical introduction to people?
I mean, chronologically, like after college, we got married.
Yeah.
So then.
So I rate pretty high just because we've been together for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about attention deficit disorder.
Okay. I have it. Well, I diagnosed myself with it. I don't know if I actually... Well, no, actually, I do have a diagnosis.
You do.
I diagnosed myself with it unofficially several years ago, but I got a diagnosis a couple years ago officially. So, yay me. That's jumping way ahead.
It is jumping ahead, but that's okay. So today, this podcast is all devoted... I keep saying all devoted. So this podcast is devoted to pursuing a whole life and all the different aspects of a whole life. And here at Pathfinder, we talk about 6 different areas that really constitute a whole life. And today I wanted to have you here, Jocelyn, to talk about, in a really personal way for both of us, about mental health. And I think we both have, from some of our professional expertise, we've got some like clinical ideas. Neither one of us are like licensed psychologists, but we both deal with helping people with mental health. And I think that'll come into the discussion. But one of the things I really value and appreciate about you is just your willingness to be open with some of our own discovery and journey and growth and healing on the mental health front. So I wanted to ask you, because mental health is kind of like, I think if someone's watching this and they're younger than we are by a handful of years, maybe this is something that's always been on their radar. Like, it's been very talked about. For me, that certainly wasn't the case, that mental health was kind of a universal issue. Like, there were people who had mental health issues, but that was a group of people who were maybe not very functional. They maybe needed treatment or to be hospitalized. And then everybody else was like presumably mentally healthy or sound. So I'm curious, what was kind of your first exposure or encounter to just the subject of mental health? Like, what do you remember about it?
I mean, I think in college, taking psychology, sociology classes is when I think I first considered like how my own brain worked, or like what kind of pathologies I might have, or just like the whole idea of what's going on in your brain and how your brain works and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for me, I think similarly. You were a little more in psychology. I was more into sociology. We both had some overlap there. But those were kind of like, oh, you're learning about this whole field that studies disorders or I guess disorders. When did like this become a more personal thing for you, though?
Well, I do feel like right away it did, because that's why it really interested me, just to like think about like how, like I really like the idea of like systems and how everything all fit together in society, and how I might fit also, and just what kind of weird things my own family did, and what kind of, like you and I loved like from day one, just like sitting and talking forever just about like how we are and how we interact and what roles different friends play, and like just the temperature and the character of conversations and relationships, like, one-on-one relationships, or group dynamics, or mass communication, or like communication, I feel like comes into it also.
Yeah.
But I mean, it started then, I would say. My family wasn't, like, my family of origin wasn't, like, super into thinking or talking about mental health or anything like that. In fact, I feel like they saw it, especially, like, in the 80s and 90s, as just kind of a fringe idea, like, didn't really think about.
Yes. I mean, and that's, as you're talking, I'm like, yeah, I remember for me, there were either really wealthy, kind of neurotic, entitled people who went and could pay for shrinks, and you'd go to a shrink or like,
yeah.
And that was kind of like a niche thing that some people did, either if they had a lot of resources or they were fussy enough, or if someone was really like sick enough that they needed serious help. They weren't functioning in life.
It was kind of a hobby, I guess, like at the beginning of like being aware of mental health. Like it was like, oh, this is interesting. And that's why I did it in college, because I didn't really.
Yeah.
It was the most interesting thing in college.
So it was interesting, but like more in a diagramming sentences, or these are frameworks that you can analyze the world. Like, did you think of yourself as someone who had any mental health issues, or it was just kind of like, oh, these are interesting dynamics? Like,
I think I did a little bit.
Yeah?
Yeah. I mean, I did a little bit, but I didn't really see it as like a huge issue or anything. Like I thought, oh, I have a little bit of that, a little bit of this. But I tend to always kind of see myself in like a pathological kind of way where I'm like, oh, yeah, I probably have a little bit of OCD and a little bit of ADD, a little bit of, I was going to say multiple personalities, but that's not right. The one I was thinking of is bipolar. Like I'm like, I can be up, I can be down. So I did see myself in those, but not in such a way where I felt like I needed to be medicated or needed to take any steps to change it. It was mostly just interesting. Did see myself in that thing, in that spectrum or whatever. But like, I feel like when.
Well, and I think in that way you were actually more open than I was. Because again, I leaned more towards the sociology stuff. I was more into, systems and like how systems cause behavior, and less about like, oh, there's dysfunction or pathology up in here. For me, it was more like it's out here in the world that forces people to act that way. And I think also, I mean, a big part of it for me was at that point in my faith journey, I don't think I really recognized. I recognized that there was patterns of dysfunction, but I primarily saw that through the lens of just sin. So there was sin, and you could deal with sin, and you could knock that stuff off, and you could, you could pray and probably get better. And so for me, I think, even though I was learning about that stuff along with you, I don't think I was looking, like that was stuff that other people had. That wasn't stuff that I had. And if I had any of those things, it certainly wasn't a disorder. It was, oh, this is a result of the system that I'm in. And so some dynamics need to change, and then that'll go away. Or this is a faith issue that I need to deal with, or a sin righteousness kind of issue that I need to deal with. So it's interesting to hear you say that, like you were already going like, oh, I could be this, because I wasn't.
Yeah.
Which probably, I think 15, 20 years later, probably 20 years later, if we're talking about college, because this year we'll be married 25 years. So we've been together for like 28 years of relationship. So yeah, I mean, fast forward a lot of years before I'm reckoning with that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense that you would have that perspective just because you spent a lot of time, like, I don't know, in school becoming a pastor. So it seems like you would have that framework for it, I guess. Well, and I grew up in a like culturally Christian household, but I didn't go to, I didn't have that framework exactly. So.
Yeah. I think it's really hard for those of us who do grow up in the church, and more or less I grew up in the church, and with the really strong, like a really strong orientation towards things of faith and wanting. And even though in the Gospels, the way it explains some of this stuff is like, demon possession and Jesus healing people who appear, we would say nowadays, they're suffering from a mental health disorder. And in the Gospels, it's described as a demon possession. But Jesus is immediate, whatever the source, Jesus is immediate mastery over some of those situations. Like could make someone who is not well mentally, he could make them well. And so for me, I thought like everything must be kind of that cut and dried. Like it must be a matter of get the sin out of your life or the thing that you're doing wrong and call on the name of Jesus, and things will probably get better for you. And if they're not, then keep working on your faith, because then that'll make things better for you. So for me, just even for a long time, even acknowledging, and I think people have different reasons why they have a hard time acknowledging that they might struggle with mental health. And again, I think the world is getting more open to this, and maybe too open to it sometimes. Like everyone's looking for pathology where there's just
everyone
normalcy.
thinks they have one.
Yeah, everything's like, it's not like, oh, I like my things a certain way. It's like, I am OCD. You're like, maybe not, or maybe I'm just particular. There's a variation. But back to what I was saying, I think for people of faith who are raised deep in the faith, that filter is really, really, I don't know. It almost
like
seemed
confusing,
like, it almost seemed like anti-faith to claim one of those things, or to acknowledge that you might have something deeper. So I'd love to fast forward in our story, and we can go back and forth however you like. But there was a moment where.
Are you talking about the onset of my anxiety?
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember the specific moment. I think you had gone to. You probably know the story better than I do.
My memory's not great.
Well, let's just make it up.
Okay, I can do that. Like when I first became anxious.
Yeah, and when you like knew that as a thing, like a label.
Yeah, I'm not really sure like how I became like aware of like a definition of anxiety. But I remember, our kids were like, I don't know, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. I don't really know. Does that ring a bell for you? What years it was?
I think it's probably right. I think it's like our oldest was probably in that range, and the younger ones were younger.
I was mostly staying home with the kids, maybe working a little bit, which was like kind of my life until pretty recently. In the last few years, I guess. I think you were pretty entrenched in your job. The kids were needing me a little bit less. So you were working a lot of hours. Our kids were needing me less. I was feeling a little bit lost, a little bit like, I don't know what my life is. What am I doing?
Yeah, because it was
where am I headed?
Around the time where I had become senior pastor here at Pathfinder. And that was like a huge step, and it was stressful leading up to it. But then it got, I think, more stressful. Once I was in it, I was like, oh my gosh, the weight of this church has now been around for 174 years. And so like just the weight of, oh, now this is my responsibility to carry this forward. So yeah, I think I was very in my own stuff.
Yeah, so I think I felt kind of alone in my transitioning out of like being like a stay-at-home mom of little kids, and just not really knowing if I wanted to be like a working person or like, I don't know, everything was kind of in transition. I feel like in like a very, I don't know, not a small way in my own experience, because it was of course pretty big in my own body, and mind, but like nothing, like we were still together and planning to be together. The kids were healthy. There was no like catastrophic things going on internally or externally necessarily. But I think that actually made it more pronounced that like I feel uneasy. And why do I feel uneasy? And I remember feeling it in my body first, like just feeling this like just kind of punchy, anxious. I don't want to use the word anxious to describe anxiety, but like just energy that cannot be like released. I remember specifically like being in the shower and just being like wanting to like squeeze or like shake my hands or just like do things with my physical self that could like release some tension inside of my body, or just cry. And I really couldn't pinpoint like what exactly was wrong, because it didn't seem like much was like really wrong. but
Yeah.
like just sort of like a low level all the time of like angst of just like, I don't know. Like kind of like confusion. That's kind of my go-to mental health. Like if I'm feeling any kind of way except for usual and normal, I'm like confused. I'm like, what is going on? Like that's what happens. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of how it started.
Yeah.
And then it got worse after that. Like I had more, not like episodes, I don't, but like just more moments or like times where I felt like really like stressed and couldn't calm myself down without like a major meltdown, like a cry or screaming into a pillow.
Like all of that energetic, whatever, that energy buildup, that kind of pressure, if it couldn't be alleviated through shaking your hands out, or like it would need
some kind of release. And but I just didn't really know, like I couldn't put words to it. And I think it was right around that time that I started doing yoga. Maybe, I think there was a couple years in there where I didn't figure out, like, physical exercise has always been really great for my mental health. Like I have always been a worker-outer.
If you weren't, I don't know that I would be as fitness minded if you weren't.
Yeah.
Like,
no, I love to
you have, I feel like you've kind of inspired me or shamed me, never intentionally, but like watching you go, I mean, like, okay, this is what grown up people need to do. Like you need to move your body. So yeah, that's always been a big focus of your life.
Yeah. Like running, lifting weights. Like I've always that's always been like so helpful for me. I don't do either of those anymore very much. Actually, I do lift weights again.
You do lift weights.
But I don't run. But that's always helped me.
Yeah. So I remember you went to see a therapist, which I was completely in support of because I knew you were struggling. I didn't really understand.
Yeah, that was
why.
one of my first steps in trying to figure out like why I was like having these like just like, what do you call it? I mean, some people I guess would call it a panic attack. And then maybe someone who has a lot of panic attacks might say that's not a panic attack.
Yeah.
But what I perceived to be like some kind of like internal turmoil that was like outside of my control that I couldn't like alleviate. And I didn't know, like only just some amount of time would go by and then I would like chill out.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
No. So yeah, you had to, you went to find a therapist and I remember like I have this vague recollection of you coming back, and what I'm trying to get at here is you were exploring your own mental health, and I'm like, yeah, good, without being disrespectful, like you clearly need to do that. You've got some anxiety or something in you, and
I don't think you were ready to call it anxiety yet.
Well, and I certainly wasn't. So I remember this conversation where you asked me about anxiety, or you said something about, oh yeah, the doctor thinks that I've got generalized anxiety or something like that. And I remember definitively,
Wait,
if I didn't say it,
I don't have that.
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know did I say it out loud, or was that just my internal, like, I remember this clear,
I feel like
I don't have that.
Yeah. I don't know if you said it or not, but I mean,
yeah, I was
I
like,
know
I
you
don't
felt
have
that
that.
way.
I don't understand that. For me, having like a little bit more of a melancholy personality is kind of what I'm more used to. So I think I might have even been like, oh, I understand a little bit of what it is to be depressive, but I don't understand anxiety at all. Like I don't have that. I don't know what that is. And some of that was because you had this like very energetic manifestation of anxiety, or sometimes, your mind would get into worries about things that didn't seem like, for me, I'm like, oh, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. Fast forward for me years later, I had been to a couple of therapists, and there was finally a therapist, I think it was like my third or fourth one. And they were like, oh, you don't know your diagnosis? And I'm like, I don't I don't have a diagnosis. I just go to therapy. You know, like I just
Because
need
you're
some
like
help.
cool guy that does cool
I
things.
just never had
like,
heard a diagnosis, and I just thought, no, life's just hard, and I'm just again. I mean, I think this idea, and I think there is some pluses and minuses to a diagnosis.
Sure.
Like I think a diagnosis can help you know what you're dealing with and pursue appropriate help and treatment. I think a diagnosis can also be constraining and hold you back. So you know,
Sure.
there's some pluses and minuses to it. But they told me, the therapist told me, oh, you've got. They're like, well, do you want to know what's in your chart? And I'm like, well, I guess if it's in my chart, maybe. But I was really reluctant. And they're like, oh, you know, it's just generalized anxiety, which, you know, is a pretty broad term. But I'm like, anxiety? I don't have anxiety because my issue with anxiety wasn't the same as yours. Mine was more of this just kind of continual dread. Like just this sense of, and it feels, it's a lower kind of energy, you know, not this, I need to run or squeeze. Mine was just kind of this oppressive dread about life. If I'm not on it, life is going to fall apart. Like the other shoe is going to drop.
I mean, you still kind of have some of that, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like when I first identified it, like that was more of what I was dealing with.
Yeah.
Not, and that didn't say anxiety to me. That, I don't know, that said something else. That said reality. That said, no, but life is heavy and the other shoe could drop. And I just thought I was seeing the world pretty squarely, realistically. And to some degree, I think that is. But my response to it was going through life with this really just, this feeling of dread. And I'd never thought of that as anxiety. But apparently it is. So, I mean, years after you have an anxiety diagnosis and you're dealing with that, then I finally like get someone telling me I have anxiety, and it's like, okay, this is really interesting because I thought I was a pretty, you know, mentally.
Yeah. Well, and I guess the way that I've
something.
come to understand it in myself is just like, it's like out of whack, like it's out of proportion, one direction or another, like a certain level of anxiety. I mean, the way that you and I talk about it is that a certain level of anxiety in life is good and normal and useful.
Yes.
Because it gives you the will to get things done. Like if you don't care about something, then you're apathetic. You don't have like any reason to, you know, move forward or whatever. So
Yeah,
I feel like for
call it
us,
the will to live. We're like, it's
Right.
the will to live. It's
Yeah.
you know, a certain level of that.
yeah, and
Well, they talk about that professionally too. Stress, like you need stress. You don't want too much stress, but you need a certain amount of stress in order to thrive. And if you don't have enough stress, you fall into decline. Like your body needs stress to keep it
going.
keep it going and operating.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like, I don't know, I feel like our kids would say, or I don't know, I work with a lot of young people and I feel like there's like this thing now where like, I have anxiety and it's all so bad.
Yeah.
And like when I first experienced those things, like that I was talking about, like that didn't feel good at all. So I can understand how when people have that feeling that they would describe it as like, I got to get rid of this. Like it's bad. It's a dysfunction or whatever. But I feel like it just got outsized. It just got bigger. Like a certain amount of feeling nervous or going over things in your mind and trying to figure out what to do next, a certain level or type or style of that is okay and functional. But then when it becomes so big that it's like taking over your shower time, then it's like, seems like you need to pay attention to that.
Yeah, and I think that was another confusing layer for me is, you know, you would have a hard time sleeping sometimes. For me, the way I would get so overwhelmed with life that I would welcome sleep and sleep really, really hard. It was like I was in...
Which is what we call freeze or some
or
other
shutdown.
Some shutting down. That's like yeah.
Yeah, one of the So, I mean, this was all a surprise to me because falling asleep and falling asleep hard seems like, I mean, like one of the measures of are you depressed or anxious is like, do you have trouble sleeping? I'm like, no, I welcome sleep. So it was a little bit hard for me to see that I was dealing with anything. You know, like I didn't feel good, but the outward signs were everything was fine. So it was a surprise to me. Was it a surprise to you that I had mental health issues? Like, how'd you see it?
I mean, I do feel like you're maybe not giving yourself totally enough credit when it comes to that, because I feel like you did know that, like, you're like, I just want to go to sleep. I just gotta, like, I feel like you did know at some level, and certainly in the last like 10 years, you've known that, like, and I guess I have seen it as a way for you to cope and manage with, like, if you're on stress overload, like that's a sign. Like if you're falling asleep really fast or just wanting to go to bed, like that's a sign that you're like, and you go to bed, hit the pillow and fall asleep.
Yeah.
Then I know that you're like, oh, you got to turn it off. So it seems like a red flag. Like it's just like showing what's going on, and I feel like you have known that, but
yeah,
maybe you haven't felt like you have. I don't know.
Yeah. So I don't
think that in itself is like horrible to do. Like it's not like you get stressed and then you're like being violent, or get stressed and you're, you know, leaving or doing drugs, or I don't know, like things that would be like, I feel like going to sleep is, I don't know.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what you're saying. Like,
right. Because I think I was dealing with things in a way that wasn't destructive.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like there was any underlying issue.
Yeah.
Like it just felt like, no, I'm just doing the normal stuff. So so I think it just became harder for me to see. And the reason this is important for me is not, like what's the purpose of going like, oh, I know that I've got a mental health challenge or a diagnosis or something to deal with. I think that's only helpful in so much as then that gives you a direction to grow and heal and to try to feel better. If you don't know that there's a problem or an issue that can be healed, then you're probably just going to stay where you are. And so I don't know how it all started, but I do want to switch gears to talking more about the healing journeys that we've been on separately and together. So both of us have tried medications at different times like those. This is not an episode that's supposed to be about the value or the detriments of medication. We found those things to be a mixed bag for us, helpful, critical at certain times. Also didn't feel like those were our long-term things. And there were some, side effects and things that we weren't overly happy with. Is that fair?
Yeah.
But medication, as I see it, and again, this is just my personal view of how I see it for me, is like a quick triage thing of like when you're really struggling and you need some immediate relief or help, medication's great. And what medication enabled in my life was then for me to do some more work to try to get to a deeper healing,
so like
deeper practices. Just
to rephrase that, like medication was useful in taking the edge off of the condition you were feeling, or that you or I mean, we've both had the same experience, so that you were able to work through things that were too stressful when it was just all encompassing without a medication.
Yes.
Yeah.
And for bad or good, like for me to be on any kind of medication for anything long term like there may become a time in life where I have to do that. I want to delay that as much as possible. Like I want to try to figure stuff out through other modalities. So that's a bias I have. Again, for bad or good, that's just kind of where I am, and I think you're in a similar place.
Well, and we both have histories in our families of origin of just being more naturally minded people.
Yeah.
On both sides.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's part of our story.
Mm-hmm. And we've passed it on to our kids as well. I mean, we parented in as much of a natural way as at least we felt we did.
Yeah. So I certainly understandable if everyone listening to this or watching this has a different experience. We respect it. This is messy stuff. But the point of this is not to debate the value of medication or not, just being honest about where we've been in our journey. But our healing journey's taken on a lot of different facets as we've tried to improve mental health. And I think the first thing, and you've kind of already said this, and you helped me understand this, that really mental health healing can't happen in the mind alone. That it's not like to pursue that healing, it's not just a mental exercise. Mm-hmm. Can you unpack that?
I mean, I feel like we did think that we could intellectualize ourselves out of our problems for a long time. I mean, like I said at the beginning, like we have always just really enjoyed talking through things, and and we're pretty emotive people. Like we're a pretty emotive couple. Like we've always been the couple who's like arguing loud. We fight with each other, and
like throwing dishes, like some.
We don't throw dishes.
We don't throw dishes, but I mean that's the spicy thing I want. We don't throw dishes because I'm too cheap to break dishes. But kind of that spicy energy of just being like pretty exuberant. Yeah.
So I mean, we've always like talked things out, talked things ad nauseum, just over talked things, and then we still like. I mean, if talking helps, of course.
Yeah.
But it's not the only way out of a difficult situation is like communicating. Like that's one facet, but like I guess for me, like for my mental health, like I mean we talked a little bit about like physical exercise has always been important to me to like I just feel better when I exercise, and I know other people have had that experience too. So just moving. And then 8-9 years back, I took a couple yoga classes, and I felt I had kind of had a similar feeling of, similar but opposite, I guess. I don't know, similar feeling of when I started with having that anxious feeling. Like I feel some release here, but I don't really know why. I couldn't pinpoint it. And I was very new to, and yoga in my definition, which if anyone who knows me knows my definition of yoga, or the branch of yoga that is moving, is just moving and breathing. Yeah. So like moving in a certain direction and taking a breath at that same time. And so once I started doing that, and at the time when I started, I was new to it. So I still had a lot of like turmoil in my, I still do presently as well. But like, I didn't know that there was a ton of turmoil in my brain while I'm trying to be in a yoga class and breathe and move. But as I practiced more and was able to let more of the space in my brain be taken up by the breathing and the moving, then there was like a big release. Like I remember crying in the first, few classes that I took, and just like being kind of like taken by surprise by like my emotional response, and like wondering if that was like weird or not, and if I was like having a mental breakdown in yoga.
So I'm curious, what felt different, because you have been into fitness and doing all kinds of things. What felt different about that than if you were in a HIIT class or in a step class? Or I
don't actually know if it's that different, honestly. I think,
but there was something about that experience that you were like.
I think like the deliberate nature of like actually, like when I was running a bunch years before, running takes you to that very similar place that yoga does, because it's rhythmic, mm-hmm. You're breathing. And sometimes when it's super hard, you can't really think about anything else.
Yeah. You're out of your thoughts.
Because you're like, your heart rate's high.
Yeah.
All you can think about is getting done with the run, or getting to that next mile, or getting to the next minute, or whatever. So I feel like there's a similar effect for sure with running. I think like the focus in yoga on like it being, like no one's ever said to me that running is outside of it being like a physical activity would improve your mental health. Like on a deeper level, no one's ever said like running is like an exercise that can help you relieve I don't know. And maybe, as I say that, maybe people have said that about running, but like,
To relieve like what, anxiety?
yeah, or just get yourself regulated, get
Yeah.
yourself into a place of calm and,
Yeah.
but I don't know, for me, yoga had like an element that I hadn't focused on before, which was just like really not engaging all of that like chatter, the internal chatter of like, that I feel like most people have. Some people don't have it, I heard. But do you have it?
I don't believe it.
Yeah.
What's interesting is, as you said, as I became more aware of like some kind of mental health issues with myself, I took it from a more mental standpoint. So I got into mindfulness and meditation, which is, more of a mental way to deal with a mental problem. And I found that to be very helpful. At first it was maddening. And then, I downloaded the Headspace app and was doing 3 minutes. And I just remember being on fire inside with just,
Like wanting to get out of it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And just being like, is this not over yet? I'm not doing this right? Just like all kinds of, and that's when I noticed that's when I became aware of my internal dialogue. And I've talked about this before, about my really strong inner critic, constantly just like this mental thought loop that's constantly telling me, or I'm telling myself, you're not doing it right. Just mess it up. You're like, you're just like, nothing's good enough. And I didn't know that was the soundtrack of my mind all the time, but I tried to meditate, and that's when I first heard it. And then, I gradually began to create space for that. And so I was getting into that. And then I think you started getting into yoga, and I had done some yoga, but yoga for me was primarily a physical thing. Mm-hmm. Like I was doing it for the exercise. Mm-hmm. And
I didn't want to do it because it was too hard.
Yeah. So I was doing P90X, for anyone who knows that thing, videos, and there's a yoga day, and yoga day, like, it sucked. It was so hard. It was 90 minutes long.
Yeah.
It would just kick my butt every time. And I remember, the guy in the video talking about just stay in the breath. And I'm just like,
don't tell me.
I'm just like,
Yeah.
I'm grinding it out. So I'm tried mindfulness. Yoga's not really a thing, but then I started accompanying you on some yoga things. And one of the differences between regular exercise that I think I felt bad while I was doing it, but good after. One of the things that was different for me about yoga is I would notice the internal chatter more. So for me, exercise was all about just like
getting it in,
getting it in, grinding it out, like just no pain, no gain. It hurts. Yeah. Like just go after it. And not at all enjoyable, but then afterwards, like you get an endorphin rush and it feels good. And you're like, okay, that's done. I think yoga was the first time that kind of mindful, rhythmic, moving, breathing. And I do think, breath work's the important element there. It had this element of, but you can also be gentle with yourself. You can also observe where your limits are, and maybe you can push back on that limit, or maybe you can just like succumb to that limit, or respect it. And that was like new thinking for me, because I would if I ever went to a group fitness class, or even when I was doing P90X, I would go to the point of exhaustion. Sometimes I would get sick shortly after a workout because I just would push myself too far, because I wouldn't, if the instructor was saying keep going, I'm going to keep going. And there was no like respect for anything that was going on. It was just like, I got to do it. And so I think that was one of the differences for me in yoga. It's just this mindful breath, rhythmic, but also this, like, I have to discern at this moment, is this something I can push myself in? Or is this something where like I need to be a little more gentle or compassionate or deferential to what's going on inside of me, and not just grinding out and pushing through?
Yeah. No, I mean, I felt that way too, because it seemed like, why would we fit yoga in when we're already trying to fit workouts in, and it's a waste of time. Like, it felt like it was a waste of time to do something gentle with your body, which sounds untrue to me now.
Yeah, and to be fair, like, so you've taught yoga for a number of years now, and I go to at least one class a week of yours, and there are moments of gentle. It is a workout. Like, I mean,
for sure.
this is no fool's yoga.
In,
this is yoga.
Yeah, no, it's heart rate rises, muscles are engaged. But I hope that there's elements of rest and recovery and reflection in each class, I guess.
So yoga became a part of your personal healing journey, and you also started teaching some of it on the side. What else would you say about yoga, or just what you learned from that what other pathways did that open for mental health healing for you, or is there anything else that you found valuable about the practice of yoga itself? I mean, you could talk about like just overall breath work or meditation.
No,
I came in through meditation to yoga, but
yeah, I feel like throughout the day, all the time, I try to. It's somewhat autonomic now, maybe, but I'll notice myself, like my heart rate getting faster because of a circumstance during the day, and I'll just be able to notice it and try to slow down my breathing or make my breathing deeper, and just like not go into a spiral of panic or.
Yeah, to me, that was one of the most mind-blowing things. And again, you were the one who opened my eyes to it. But the power of the breath to control the nervous system. Mm-hmm. And this isn't like witchcraft voodoo stuff. Like this is science. This is hard science. Mm-hmm. So you've got these parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, and the one is unconscious, one is more conscious. But the link between the two and the way that when all of a sudden you're getting panicky and you can't control that. Nothing in you is saying, hey, Jocelyn, like get nervous at work right now or get panicky at work right now. There's some trigger in the environment. Your body is responding to it because that's what your body is meant to do. It's trying to keep you safe. It's trying to give you what you need for that moment. You realize it's not helpful because you've built some sense of awareness and you're like, okay, like I don't need to run from a tiger right now. There's no tiger in the room. How do I bring myself down? And that's one of the shocking things is that the breath actually has the power to restore the body to homeostasis. Simply by changing the way you breathe, you can change your nervous system state.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that, like, looking back on our history together, like I think, at least from my perspective, we really felt like we could analyze and just figure out and categorize and make a plan and communicate effectively and do this and that. And then we'd be happy. When
something had a name and an explanation, then it would be solved.
Yeah. And so I think I've found a lot of like comfort in just knowing that like we don't actually have to sort everything out. We can breathe slowly, and a lot of things really do like dissipate and are no longer as large or as detrimental as we once thought, because in the moment when circumstances happen, life happens, big catastrophic things or just little annoyances or disturbances or little problems that need to be solved. It sounds like so silly, I guess, but like really just taking time to slow down your breathing.
Yeah.
And not say any words, not sort anything out, not make a list, not make a decision, but just like slow down and breathe.
Yeah, and there's great stuff out there. If anyone's interested, there's great stuff out there about different breath patterns and how they can help center you in different ways. There's I've seen a lot of stuff on my Instagram feed about box breathing or box breaths where you kind of inhale, hold, exhale. Like I've heard everything from 3 seconds or 4 second inhales, 2 second holds. So that's more of a rectangle to me, but whatever. There's stuff like that. You can, by, extending your exhale?
Extending your exhale is supposed to calm you down, slow down your heart rate. And so, if you extend your exhale, that's going to make more space in your lungs for your inhale. So an inhale is supposed to, from what I know, just the little that I know from learning to teach yoga, is that
And don't sell yourself short.
well,
you know a
oxygen
lot.
comes into the body when you breathe in.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more you breathe in deeper, the more places it's going to go into your body. So if you've got tension anywhere, oxygen is going to come in and just soothe and restore and, energize your body on the inhale. And then the exhale, letting everything out is going to soften joints, muscles, nervous system. So if you're looking for a breath to energize you, you would make your inhale bigger, deeper, harder. And if you wanted,
With short exhales, right? Like
just
blow it
a
out.
little shorter, like not like you want pretty, in my opinion, or in my experience, I guess, even inhales and exhales, but maybe for more energy, you focus on the inhale, more rest and recovery and relaxation and calm. You would focus on the exhale.
Exhale, make that longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and with the whole breathing thing, it's just pretty crazy to, again, like how much power that has. But like people have been talking about this. Do you remember being a kid in elementary school and you're upset?
Count to 10.
Count to 10
Yeah.
and take, or go take 5 deep breaths. And that stuff, like it's been known, but I don't think we understood. It felt like it was just a pass the time thing.
Mm-hmm.
Give your mind a second to clear, not understanding all of the stuff that it does to reset your activated nervous system. And it's really, really powerful. I think one of the problems though is people who sit on phones and at desks and
Me.
don't sing.
Me. Describe to me just now.
So people who don't sing or
sit
play
at a
wind
desk.
instruments,
I don't play a wind instrument.
we don't know how to breathe. We actually,
I do.
so I think fundamentally, unless even in working out, we tend to take shallow chest breaths.
Mm-hmm.
And if you ever taken a singing class or done choir, one of the first things you have to work on is how do you take belly breaths? How do you breathe from your diaphragm, which is a deeper breathing, gives more oxygen into your whole body. We tend to take shallow chest breaths. A lot of us, our shoulders rise when we breathe and shoulders go up and down. And really, belly breaths don't require you to move your shoulders at all. And it's a deeper breath. So that's part of the issue. I think about the state of mental health, and I think there are lots of things going on with it. But I'll tell you that I think the fact that we don't know how to breathe anymore because our lifestyles don't demand that we breathe big. Mm-hmm. You get in a certain level of activity, and your body will naturally start breathing that way. But our bodies and our work don't demand that we breathe that way. We're singing less as a culture. Like people used to sing together, and people would go to church and they would sing. And so that singing, I think singing is also a very rhythmic, meditative thing. There's a lot of studies about group singing.
Yeah, but people who aren't good at singing don't
But
like
you
to
like to
do
sing.
that. I do, but I know other people don't like to be by me when I'm singing.
That's not true.
I don't think you like being by me when I'm singing.
I've never objected once to being by you when you sing. You sing great. And it's not like you sing loud, so I can out-sing you. I'll just like cover over you. No, you sing great. But there's some. So
But you know what I'm saying, though.
I do know what you're saying. But there's a loss. But if you look at rising anxiety levels, and we want to blame it all on
the rain.
On what?
The rain.
The rain don't mind.
The rain don't care.
Yeah, only half the people know what we're talking about, if that. But I just think it's interesting to me if you just trace the mental health crisis back to, if you just examine it, and this is not the whole story, but if you looked alone at the history of breathing and where we are as a culture with breath work, just in some of the natural ways that we've lost our connection with our breath and rhythmic breathing and communal breathing and singing, or I think that would be an interesting study just to look at that alone, to be like, oh, no wonder so many of us are struggling with overwhelm, because in the first place, we just don't know how to breathe, and our breath is our key, our primary way to control our nervous system when it's activated.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk at all about? So there's another thing that you got really connected with first and then told me about is like the polyvagal theory of the nervous system, that the nervous system is kind of like this ladder, if you will, and there are these different states as you're in distress that you drop down into.
Yeah, and I'm not like super like I haven't looked at it in a while, so I don't know how like.
Yeah, we can. Me neither. But let's fake it. Let's
Okay.
just do it together.
Well, so there's your nervous system. The way that I understand it, you have a nervous system, and the polyvagal theory is that your vagus nerve controls your nervous system, and that you can be any number of places on this imaginary ladder.
Yeah.
So in the middle of the ladder is safe and social, where you feel no danger, you feel calm, you're engaged, but you're not afraid. So you don't feel like doing anything except for just you're present. When you're in that safe and social place, you can engage with others, but you feel good within yourself. You're not feeling any urges to like do anything except for just be.
Yeah, you're just
Be.
Yeah, when people talk about like just be present,
Yeah,
be in the moment.
That's
That's
it.
what we're talking about.
So then you're regulated. Your nervous system your breathing is slow, it's deep, it's rhythmic, and you might be doing it intentionally, you might not be, but you're feeling good. And then you might experience like maybe a loud noise happens. And so just for example, a very easy thing to get you out
Something
of.
triggers you.
Something triggers you. It could be anything from.
It can be a look. It can be like a weird look or a glance.
It can be a loud noise. It
someone,
can be
a loved one, and you're like, uh-oh.
Yeah. So then at that point, you might move somewhere on the ladder, depending on your previous experiences. You might go one of two directions. So you might go, you might get activated and be in a place where you want to either fight or flight. And then there's some other
Yeah, there's like a
fringe
fawn state or something. Is that, I don't know if
states
that's
that
there
are
too.
fun and there's another F word.
Freeze. Fawn, freeze.
Freeze is different.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, so fight or flight, basically,
Yeah.
and some other variations. You might feel the need to, like, your nervous system's activated, so you might feel the need to punch or to get out.
Yeah, one of the things I remember, and there's probably different views on this, is that it's more natural to want to run first. So if there's a threat, the first normal response is, can I get out of here? And so you might even feel some energetic, like, in your legs, or you might feel that kind of, I need to get up and do something.
Okay, so wait, I think the ladders actually starts at the top with safe and social. So then you go to fight or flight, then...
But then, yeah, if you can't run away, then you fight. And there's some people rank that differently, but that makes sense. And that some of us learn if you can't run. So I was in a place in life where I couldn't ever run from the things that were tormenting me.
So you had to fight.
So I tend to drop to fight more. Our son Corbin, you and Corbin have this game where you like to scare each other. And I had to make clear to him that if I really get scared, same to you, if I really get scared, like I might attack. Just because that's like running away. And you see this like on videos when people get scared and they run away and they cower in the corner. Like that's not me. Running away doesn't feel like it's an option. Like I'll kind of freeze for a second and then I want to like protect myself by fighting. And that's kind of a polyvagal learned reaction.
Response.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then if you can't run and you can't fight, you might play dead. You might freeze.
Yeah.
So
You
that's
might just
the next.
go to bed and say, I'm going to go to sleep right now. And
Yeah, and I mean, down from freeze is like total shutdown. I feel like that's a little bit of a different
yeah.
level. So if you're in safe and social, they call that a ventral state, I believe. Like you're in your nervous system, your
Yeah, the one part of your
existing
nervous
mind,
system.
body, everything is in sync. And then if you go down the ladder, you're in dorsal, you're in protection mode. You've got your back, your
you're
dorsal
covering
fin is up to protect you, and your heart is protected, and your spine and your dorsal fin, I guess, the back of your body is protecting you. So you might cower but it's very much
you're
connected to your
state.
body.
Yeah, and I think that's so to me, that's the point of, thank you for refreshing your own and our memory on the polyvagal theory, because I think one of the helpful things is all of those responses are physiological. And so this idea that mental health has to be dealt with
in your
the mind
brain only. Yeah.
is
It's just incomplete. That's all.
it's incomplete.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff going on in your body, and
It's not
there's
bad.
things that you can do to try to regulate yourself through.
And just to alleviate some of your pain and
Physical.
your discomfort of being a human. And just like your head is part of it for sure, but your body's also a pretty big part of your life. So to be able to kind of make everything work together so that you can be comfy and enjoy life and be available to yourself and other people, it's pretty detrimental to, I think, have, I don't want to say an understanding because that takes it to the brain and the thinking, but just to have an awareness. But awareness can sometimes be like, well, I don't know, that just takes it, I feel like, somewhere in a head level. Like if you can have the experience of using your body to alleviate your discomfort, I feel like you really brought yourself to a place of being able to heal.
Yeah, I think you're right that awareness seems like a mental thing, but like
you got to start
noticing.
somewhere.
It's the noticing,
yeah.
and noticing isn't. And that's one of the things they teach you in mindfulness is that there's a difference between like judging a thought or answering a thought and just noticing, like, oh, I had a thought, or noticing a sensation. That's a sensation, and just to noticing it is just becoming aware. But I think awareness often becomes for us the same as understanding. Or
Like, how do I figure this out? How do I feel?
Yeah. So I think the first thing that that we learned on our journey is, well, the first thing I learned is that, my mental health wasn't all that I thought it was. I think the second thing is, in order to bring healing, it can't be in the mind alone. Really got to get into the body. And so there's exercise that can help, especially intentional or thoughtful exercise, which is really linked to the breathing. There's a bunch of stuff on the nervous system. You can work with your nervous system state, whatever it is, your polyvagal state. And there's all kinds of really neat techniques to do that. Again, I'll put in a plug for singing. It's supposed to be really good to stimulate the vagus nerve and to return you to a more safe and social kind of place.
I like screaming.
Yeah,
it's not great for your voice, but
yeah, I mean, there's something about the stimulation there. Again, it's physiological, which is really.
Or listening to music loud. Like I don't know. I feel like an entry point for someone who's not a singer might be a more palatable, like screaming or listening.
And this occurred to me when we were talking about the safe and social state, that a lot of us, there's a lot of judgment about not being able to be in the present and to be present and just be in the moment. And I think some of us have a hard time doing that. And there feels like we feel bad about that. Like, why can't I be in the moment? You can't be in the moment if your nervous system is not in a safe and social place.
So that's a great place to start.
It's not your fault. If you're continually in a different, like, you really can't be present. So stop feeling bad about it or feeling judged or just know that's information, that's data that says, now what are some things I can do to try to bring myself into a safe and social place? Yeah,
well, and I'm not a theologian, and I don't want to open another can of worms here, but like, I feel like that goes very much hand in hand with like a sinful nature. Like, here we are.
Yeah.
We've got this. It's how things are. We are here.
Yeah.
Your nervous system is a biological result of your environment, your internal, external environment. And like, so where do we go from here? Like, it's not about placing blame or being more or less mentally healthy than the next person or being more screwed up than the next person. It's just more about like, okay, here we are. It's okay. Just breathe. And that sounds trite. Like, just breathe, dummy. But
it can be, but it's so, like, you went there theologically. It's so theologically deep that in the beginning, Genesis, what makes man a living being is the Ruach Yahweh.
Is that breath?
The Spirit of God or the breath of God.
Yeah.
Same word. Ruach Yahweh is the Spirit of God or the breath of God. And that's what animates what is otherwise dust and makes it alive. And then in the resurrection, Jesus comes and he breathes on the disciples and says, receive the Holy Spirit, because the pneuma of the New Testament, the Greek word, spirit and breath and wind are all the same again. And so I think it's really, really beautiful that to create us, God breathes into us, and breath is the animating force. And obviously, like we can't be alive without breath, so that makes sense. But like the power of breath, and that the Holy Spirit is, and the Spirit is the Spirit of peace, amongst other things, but especially the Spirit of peace. The Holy Spirit is, the word is one and the same as breath. It's holy breath.
And the cool thing about that I just thought of is that, God does that for you. Your breath is autonomic. You don't have to focus on your breathing to be able to breathe. Yeah. God breathed life in, and so we breathe.
Grace.
We don't have to do anything. Yeah. It happens. But we can be a part of it. We can join along.
Yes,
and be
co-creators in this world. Yeah.
And we can cultivate a more softened and generous spirit by partaking in it. Yeah. And we're invited to partake in all the things. Like, that's how God is, like with baptism, communion. Like, we're like, he says, be involved. I'll do it for you, but also, come on.
Yeah.
It'll be cool.
There's a participatory part of it for us, even though it's pure grace.
Which is for our enjoyment. Like, he'll do it for us anyway. We'll stay alive, but the journey will be more interesting and more joyful. And
yeah, I want to make breath work a sacrament. I wonder if I can do that.
Yeah. Let me know how that goes.
So, what else? Other healing modalities that come to mind? So, I've been trying. This is a fringe one that you haven't done, and you can tell me your opinion of it. For the last 7 months, cold plunging. It's all the rage, but I've been doing it primarily from the mental health side of things. There's some data that says it can help rewire your brain, and especially people who've. So I've encountered some complex trauma. It's a diagnosis, and if you know the ACEs test of adverse childhood experiences, my number's pretty high. So there's a lot of stuff in my early life, and those early years are especially critical as your nervous system's developing. And so if you're young and you have a lot of assaults on your nervous system as it's developing, it kind of develops in a funky way. And there's all kinds of new, research about the neuroplasticity of the brain and the nervous system, that it can heal. So anyway, I've been cold plunging as a way to be like, okay, and there's kind of some mixed thing with people like me about whether it's a good idea or not. What are your thoughts on cold plunging?
I mean, I think it's great for you. I really do.
I've heard it's not great for women to do, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You never told me that.
Well, I've been keeping it from you.
Phew. Well, I don't want to do it anyway, so it sounds horrible.
Yeah.
I wish you didn't have to do it, because I wish you didn't have stuff that you carry so deeply. I wish it wasn't the case, but you've always been a person who tries to do lots of different things to bring more wholeness to yourself. So I feel like any earnest attempt at that is like, I love the idea. Like, I'm so glad when you cold plunge, because I think it helps you to feel like you're participating in your healing. And there's science behind it. I mean, it's regulating your nervous system. Like, it's nervous system
putting
related.
yourself in a difficult circumstance and not grinding through it, but really just trying to calm yourself. Mm-hmm. So for me, the goal is, if I can do that in 32-degree water, then I can probably do that in life when I'm in a distressing situation. When I notice, like you're saying, the cues of like, I feel distress. Mm-hmm. Well, if I can soothe myself in freezing water, I can do it there. Sleep. Do you want to talk about sleep and just the journey of trying to get good sleep?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not great at sleep, but I do take some supplements now, and I have a ring that tells me about my sleep so that I can do it better next time. Girls need more sleep than boys, is what I've read. Sleep's super important. It's not really good to drink at nighttime when you want to sleep well, I've noticed for myself. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, say what you mean. I'm not.
Sleep. I need a lot of sleep. I need like 9 hours.
Yeah.
I don't get that much, but that's what I need.
And I think that's one thing that we've tried to take seriously, probably
Sleep.
our whole marriage. Like different seasons, it was harder, but I
Yeah.
think we've always been people who are like, sleep's important.
Yeah, I go to bed at 9:15.
And maybe that's because we're both always a little frayed around the edges, and we know that you can keep our stuff together better if we're well rested, and
Yeah,
if
we
we're not
start
well rested,
arguing around 8:30. Let's just go to bed.
You brought up alcohol, and just so, yeah, I for me, alcohol. There's a lot of right now in the world. There's a lot of data that talks about how alcohol's not good for you in any amount, which to me distresses me because I've been a casual drinker for my adult life and enjoy it, and also feel like it helps me get into a safe and social place. Sometimes it takes some of the edge off, helps me be able to interact with people better, leave things behind. So I've had this real lot of guilt stuff around drinking, especially drinking as medicine, where you're like, I think this is helping me, but I think that's bad that it's helping me, or people will look down on that, or your doctor asks you about it, and I think there's some increasing understanding around what alcohol does to the body, but I think there's also some increasing shame and judgment around that whole issue. That's problematic. One of the things that we've said is in seasons where we're more casually drinking than others. I've always had this belief that I think at some point in my life, I'm going to stop and say, I don't know if this is serving me well anymore, and I'll change my relationship with alcohol. And I think we're kind of there at this phase of life. And again, I'm even hesitant to talk about this because I don't want anyone to feel pressure who's not in this place in life, because this may sound crazy, but I'm kind of grateful alcohol exists in the same way that I'm grateful that pharmaceuticals exist.
Sure.
I think it's been a helpful mechanism. And for me, I haven't had a struggle with it that's led to anything overtly destructive. It's not caused me to lose a job or lose friends or anything. I've never had that downside with it. But I think we're in a season right now where we're questioning just where we are right now. And some of that is as you age, your hormones change and everything, but where we're questioning our relationship with alcohol. So what do you think about alcohol and mental health as you've assessed it in your own life?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know.
Yeah.
I think it's fun in the same way that dancing is fun and yoga is fun and running is fun and scaring Corbin is fun. I feel like it's a pastime. And I come from
playful.
a family of partiers, so it feels pretty synonymous with social engagement for me. My hormones are changing, so alcohol is affecting me kind of negatively. So I can't sleep if I drink anything, so I don't really want to, but that's not always been the case, and that isn't always going to be the case, I don't think. But yeah, I feel like anything, I don't know, I like to have a whole smorgasbord of things that I can go to if I'm wanting to go to a different nervous system state. If I want to chill out, or I don't know.
Yeah.
And then it just occurred to me that it sounded like maybe I was talking about smoking pot, but that's a whole nother thing.
It's legal here now, but yeah, that's not our thing.
No, it's not.
One of my favorite articles that I've read, because again, I overconsume information about everything as I'm trying to be a healthier person.
As do I.
One of the favorite articles I read about drinking is, if you're going to drink, you should do it in conjunction with social activity, because it does enliven your ability to be playful and social. and so can enrich social interactions. But Americans in particular, we tend to drink more often alone or while we're doing something else that's not necessarily social. And that's not exactly having it work for us. So I have noticed that it does help me get into a more playful place. And I want to reserve that for those times, because it really, there are times where I drink and I'm like, that, I think that enriched that because I was just a little more free and playful in a completely healthy, constructive way. And that enriched the interaction. And then there are some times where alcohol like will numb or diminish an interaction because you're trying to use it for something else. So
or make you grumpy.
It's tricky. Or
too.
Yeah. Nutrition, anything to, I'm just going over all the things.
Yeah. Like nutrition on mental health. I mean, I definitely feel better if I'm eating better, but I don't know if that's because of how it makes me feel physically.
Yeah, there's some sort of link.
Yeah.
I have a lot of body inflammation. So I've got a nervous system, part of my wonky nervous system is I have severe allergies to lots of things. So I did, 5.5, 6 years of allergy shots, to try to bring some of that under control, and immunotherapy for that. And that's helped. But for me, there are a lot of things that cause inflammation in my body, and definitely when there's inflammation, it's not good for my mindset. Like I'm way more depressed or just brooding, moody, anxious. So those are some things. What about? Well, I'll just put it out there. I think one of the things that I've learned a ton of things from you about yoga, health, breath work. I think one of the things that you've taught me more than anything else is you are one of the most compassionate people I've ever met toward your family and your loved ones and just people around you. And
thanks.
You're welcome. And the practice of self-compassion. There's a lot written about this. Dr. Kristen Neff, I believe is her name, has written a kind of the main book on practicing self-compassion and how that actually helps. Believe it or not, practicing self-compassion actually helps you achieve more. You hit more of your goals. You're higher producing than if you're self-critical drill sergeant kind of thinking. But you've helped me a ton with cultivating that voice of self-compassion. So I said earlier that I realized when I started doing mindfulness that there was just this constant critiquing voice. I call it the inner drill sergeant. And your voice has been like, you've even heard me. So my dad was a carpenter, so I do home renovations to our house. And so you've heard me sometimes as I'm doing something. I remember one time in particular, I was redoing our whole bathroom and I messed something up and I'm just like, berating myself. And you're like, hey, don't talk to my husband that way. Like, don't speak to him that way. And it's kind of silly, but it's also like, oh, there it is again. And so cultivating a voice of self-compassion is something that has revolutionized my mental health. And that's something that I have you to thank for that. You've been the external voice of compassion that I didn't have internally.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that we use that pretty often. Like if there's ever any outward, like our kids will be like getting down on themselves for this or that. And I think that gentle reminder of like, hey, don't talk to my buddy that way, or don't say that about little Dion, and like little kid Dion that is scared or.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any other, as we wind this down, are there any other tools or tricks of the trade that you have found? Again, we're not offering like the end all be all. We're just speaking from our own experience about things that have been helpful. I guess I hope this goes without saying that, prayer, worship songs, like those have incredible benefit to just, if you know how God thinks about you and how he sees you, and like so much can be okay when you just know how much God loves and delights in you, like you can start to have that view of yourself. So maybe I'm negligent not mentioning that, but I hope it goes without saying that those are really powerful practices too. Is there anything else that comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that foundation is, like you said, like goes without saying, like it's sort of obvious or just, I mean, that foundation has always been the basis for any of our modalities of just trying to feel better. But
yeah, if you can start with a God who's gracious, who loves you, who's not saying do more, be more. To me, that's, like your voice of of compassion, teaching me self-compassion is like, but it's your human voice that helps me hear God's voice, and to be like, oh, that's what that sounds like. And then, you read the scriptures and you're like, of course, that's what God is saying to us all through the pages of scripture. And so maybe with that self-compassion, it's just like this attitude of self-acceptance of just like, one of my favorite phrases, where I am is okay, even though there's further to go. Like, where I am is okay, even though there's further to go. Like, I want to keep growing. I'm not at the destination. There may be things in my life that aren't as I want them to be, but where I am right now is okay, which is also something that can just kind of take the edge off the anxious mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can't think of anything else exactly.
So as you, I'll give you a second to think if you, in the back of your mind while you answer this. So as you think about where you are today and where you were 8-10 years ago, I know you'd be the first to say that it's not like you're like, I'm healed, everything's better, no problems now. But when you look back at that person who was having those initial episodes, like what do you see about the journey? Just what's your overall impression, or what's your overall, I don't know, what's the summary of it? Or do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I always hesitate to speak about growth because I always feel like there's growth and then you realize you just like don't actually know anything more than you knew when you were not grown. But like, so I think about, like if I go back to one iteration of me, the anxious person who has little kids, and then I go back to an earlier iteration of me, maybe a teenager who doesn't know what to do, or, like, and anytime I go back to any of those phases in my mind's eye, I feel like, I don't know, like, I feel compassion and like care for each of those versions of myself, and like knowing that in the future there's going to be another circumstance where everything gets turned upside down and I'm going to have to start from scratch. So I feel like growth I feel thankful to know about how to like manage in this life differently. But I know that there will be things that come. And so I hope that a posture of openness and relying on just like a position of grace, or just being in a state of grace. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but just like living under grace, or I don't want to get like, I don't like how that sounds exactly. It sounds a little churchy for my own.
Or just maybe confusing for people who like.
Yeah, I guess just like
it sounds like a platitude, but.
Yeah, but just like being, like knowing that there's always going to be something new to face, and you might be prepared, you might not, but.
But don't you think, I mean, what is different, it seems to me, is that you have more tools now. So like you said, you like have a smorgasbord of things to choose from. And the more tools you have, like once you have tools, you get to keep those tools. Like once you, like when
unless
I'm working
they break
on a home,
and they don't work for the new thing that you're doing.
I don't think they ever break. I mean, the ones from Lowe's do, the cheap ones that I buy, but
and maybe I've bought a lot of those because I've tried a lot of cheap things.
Well, they may not work on that certain issue, but they might work on another issue in the future. And I just feel like as life goes on, maybe you don't graduate out of things, but you do develop more tools that might become helpful to you as you encounter different things. And so the next trauma, the next difficulty, you've got more to
for sure.
From.
But I do think there is a place where life takes you where you're stuck and you know nothing once again. Like you're completely at square one. And I feel like that, like what I do know is that like it's okay to feel like that because there's a way out of it. There's a way.
Yeah, and maybe that's what's different is that once you kind of go through a few of these things, you can remember that there's a way out of it.
Yeah.
And
there are things that are available and there are things to grab at until you can get to a place where you might be in that new place of growth.
Yeah, I got to interrupt here because speaking of tools, one of your favorite tools, and I'm really impressed that you haven't had to do it yet, is when you're sitting for too long like you are, is to go do cartwheels or handstands.
Yeah, my legs are dying for a cartwheel or handstand. Or to really stretch or something like.
No, but I'm grateful that you bring up the because I think one of the dangers of a conversation like this is like had a problem, figured out some tools, now I don't have any problems anymore. And I remember actually I just brought this up the other day, and it's probably going to make me emotional, so I'm preparing myself. I was going through some cards and stuff, and I found a note that you wrote me 5 years ago. It was on our anniversary, so almost 5 years ago. And in the note, you acknowledged that things had been hard, and the line that stayed with me is you said something about being hopeful, that you feel really hopeful, or you feel hopeful for the first time in a long time, and that you felt like it was there was something that was a turning point. Over the last 5 years, we've been through it, like circumstantially, like life has not been easy to us at all. But as I read that note, I remembered a little bit about just what a struggle it was for both of us at different times. How frustrating it is when you're trying to get mental health help, and the system does not make it easy for you. You know, like you have an EAP, and which I have through work, and then they send you a list of 10,000 counselors. You pick one, you call them. They're like, sorry, we don't take that EAP anymore. And you're like, and this is while I'm not feeling well. And I'm feeling overwhelmed, and literally you're overwhelming me. So like this is not an easy place to be in. And I think having people around you or having community to support you is just so critical, because it's really hard to take any steps. Reading that note from 5 years ago just reminded me of how hard and dark it was, but it also just filled me with a sense of gratitude for how God does heal and life does get better. And it's sometimes long and grueling, but I think we as people, who knows what tomorrow will bring, but we as people today, I look back at that note, you had a reason to be hopeful. Like we are in a better place together as a couple. We're in a better place as individuals, and we still have a lot of work to do, and life is going to continue to be hard. But it just reminded me of like, there's a reason to be hopeful, even as you're doing all the work.
Yeah.
There's a reason to be hopeful and to believe and trust that there's a good and loving God who's there with you in the most overwhelming parts of the journey, and he's trying to bring you through to something better. And so today, without my other shoe getting ready to drop, kind of fear all the time, I just want to acknowledge that, like, in this moment, I can see clearly that God has brought us through a lot, and whatever comes tomorrow, like he's going to be there to get us through that too. And it's great to have a partner to get through it together.
Yeah. And
so thanks for being that for me, and thanks for being here today.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I cut you off, I think. Were you trying to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say, when you were saying that about the just hopefulness, like I think just coming back to what you were asking about what, and I was reticent to say that anything does anything at all, but just having the practices that we've talked about throughout this time, just like incorporating different modalities, anything from medication to breathing to having a social drink or two with friends to singing, you know, like there's, I think what we've cultivated is a stable, consistent environment of using a whole bunch of modalities over time. And here we are. We're okay. We've come through a lot, you know, and we just keep trying stuff, trying to be okay one day at a time.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up, I want to call out a couple things. I named some resources in this episode, and I'll make sure those get put in the show notes. Again, if you're someone who needs to or wants to discover more about where you are on your whole life journey, if you want to take a whole life assessment, there's one available for you at ippodcast.org. That's inpursuitpodcast.org, or you can go to pathfinderstl.org/whole life. At pathfinderstl.org/whole life, you can find out about whole life action teams if you're here in St. Louis, that can help you grow in any part of the journey. Jocelyn, you're an action team leader here in different seasons, right?
Yep. Just seasons, finishing up a beginners stretching and yoga 4-week session.
So those will be popping up over the future. So anyone here who's local in St. Louis, you're welcome to join us here at Pathfinder for that. And Jocelyn is she's my favorite. And this is, some spouses would be like, say this, and they would just kind of say it gratis. You had to earn this, because I don't give high praise out very easily. But Jocelyn is my favorite yoga teacher that I've ever had, and I've experienced a few good ones, and she's the best one. So if you ever get a chance to jump into her action team, I encourage you to do it. And up until then, whether we see you in a yoga action team or something else, God bless you on your journey towards wholeness and wellness, and we'll see you again soon.